Well, all of us have been called to be media spokespeople for the Lord. But we have to be informed in order to be able to speak as media people. So now we have two of the most important media people that you would like to hear or meet. Felice, Friedson. Felice, come sit. Troy Miller. If you want truth in media, these are two people that you must know of, listen to, connect to. They are going to be speaking on the weaponization of social media, especially now during the war. Felice came to our apartment. My husband and I live in Capitol Hill half of the time, and we live in Jerusalem half of the time. And Felice came to our apartment a year ago, maybe, something like that. And I was blown away at what she had to tell us. She has been in the forefront of media communication for decades and created a national syndicated radio program that brings reporting from the Middle East. She presents her story in context, whether she is reporting it from Jerusalem or Ramallah, where the PA is located, since 2000. During COVID, she actually initiated a student program called the Press and Policy Program. And she has developed a concept for the Media Limited LTD, Media Line Limited. You can look it up. It's themedialine.org. And you can get correct reporting there, not CNN. She specializes in covering the Middle East, which has become one of the most prolific content providers in the region. She provides it correctly to others. And their other wonderful participant is Troy Miller. He served in the U.S. Navy proudly as a veteran. And then he was CEO for James Kennedy Ministries. He speaks on strategic business planning, on IT development, organizational development, but the biggest thing, since 2022, he has been the president of the National Religious Broadcasters. We all know the NRB and the wonderful convention that they have every year, again presenting truth in media. And in 2023, he was recognized as a Christian top leader supporting Israel by the Israel Allies Foundation as being on Israel's top 50 Christian allies list. He is married and has 4 children. So, Felice, start us off.
Connie, thank you so much. Yes, there we go. Connie, thank you so much. I want to begin, first of all, by thanking Albert and Michelle, and that there's mighty forces happening in this room watching what's going on between the Jewish and Christian community as I've really never seen. And I've seen a lot. I want to begin with a film to show you what real reporting is, and we're going to just look for a few minutes, and if we can roll the video, please. October 7th shook the world. October 7th saw 1,200 Israeli and multinationals killed. 10,000 were wounded. They came to slaughter, to destroy. I know they kidnapped girls, that they raped women after killing them. October 7th saw the UN deny the rape of women and men.
Why did the international organizations not believe immediately? We have witnesses, we have videos, first responders.
October 7th, the world will begin to learn about the massive city of tunnels.
All of the concrete that Hamas has used in order to build the support infrastructure for those tunnels has entered through Israel in the form of international aid.
As the world was told of a massive food shortage in Gaza, the media line spoke to Gazans.
It is Hamas that takes the aid and leaves us hungry.
Many Gazans have been pawns of Hamas, but many were compliant in the horrific acts on October 7th. Many came to bear witness of the atrocities of October 7th.
The International Court of Justice and the Criminal Court also have made steps to really undermine their authority.
The The wave of anti-Semitism around the world in the streets and university campuses is still in motion.
What we've seen is that in the classroom, the students have been taught lies, not just for 6 months or a year. They've been taught lies for decades.
But the plight of the hostages has hit people in the heart all over the world.
Do you not see the knife that's sticking out of my heart? Why would you ask that? Or you don't see the truck that's on our chest? Why would you ask that? It seems perverse.
What do you say to those who denied October 7th?
I didn't even know that there are people who are denying October 7th.
These are some of the stories that shape the news. However, a large part of the market gets their news through social media networks.
We have to remember that there are 1.8 billion Muslims in the world who are spreading the message coming out of Gaza, comparing to 15 million Jews in the world.
These platforms have been spinning out of control, and misinformation is driving the narrative. Join me as we look at how social media is shaping our decisions and what can be done.
Just last Friday, I looked into the eyes of Rachel Goldberg Poland at the end of the mourning period, and I went over to her, and I will never forget that face for the rest of my life. A woman who's been broken. A woman who everyone in this world knows. A woman who lost her son for no reason. And I looked in her eyes, and I thought of her son in those tunnels. And then I thought about my son, who was in Gaza for more than 200 days, who was almost killed a few weeks ago, and he survived. These are the stories as journalists that we go and we tell each and every day. A team of journalists that are in Israel. Believe it or not, we have a journalist in Gaza who tells the stories, not like the New York Times just did this weekend in the beginning of the war when I asked him to go and tell the story about what was happening on the ground and the Gazans that would courageously speak out against Hamas. Of course you can't show the faces of these people. These people, not all, but many, were pawns in this war that Hamas didn't use money to educate them, but to build tunnels. We were the first agency in 2004 showing the world the tunnels that went from Egypt into Israel, and they were able to transport cars through those tunnels. And we followed that story year after year. Don't trust me, check it out on the 100,000 stories that are on the Media Line site. Just the facts, folks. If we lived in a world of just getting the facts, but we don't. We live in a world where social media has taken over mainstream media, and mainstream media isn't so great. The bottom line is if we look at what the Telegraph just reported about the BBC own editorial line is messed up because they actually were just researched, and it seems that of the 1,500 stories they had, the Hamas terrorist organization was not called a terrorist organization except for 3.2% of the time. Do you hear what I just said? It is mind-boggling what is going on today in terms of the news industry. And I blame the public as well because they need to learn how to read the news. How many of you study journalism? Oh, hey, I'm actually surprised. There's quite a number here. But honestly, most people don't. And in order to understand what you're being fed, you need to understand it. It should be taught in grade school as part of curriculum that if we don't have journalism in our back pocket, that we will never understand what a free democracy is. The reality of this war is that the weaponization of social media is one of the key components Hamas has used, a la what happened during the Nazi period with Goebbels. And if we don't understand that we are getting our news instantaneously, and let's face it, Israel has done a lousy job over and over and over at its PR, and you ask why. Now, some of it I might just state is the fact that it's still Israel as a government putting information out. But it's the job of the journalist to be able to get the stories. It's the job of the journalist to tell all sides of the stories. And when we send out our journalists to the north to see what's happening and the fact that all those families can't come back into their homes for nearly a year and Israel de facto has lost their border, that story needs to be told. 1,200 Israelis were killed on October 7th. Hundreds were taken hostage. Do we see that back in the headlines daily? We don't. Because news is instantaneous, and we must remind people of the stories. I'm going to deviate for a minute only because it's tied to Yemen. And I was in Yemen a month before the revolution. And I always ask everyone, how many of you knew what a Houthi was before October 7th? How many of you? A few. But the Houthis are a Shia group run by the Ayatollah Khomeini. And the Houthis are wreaking havoc on Israel and the world and the Red Sea, and it is affecting the economy of the entire nation. So we all better know who the Houthis are, and we better understand that the legislators, some who are sitting here do understand, that we must be able to hold the world accountable. And this is critical. But they won't be able to if they don't understand the knowledge base of what's happening, the bases that the United States holds in the Middle East, the arms embargoes that have happened and are happening as we speak to the state of Israel. The stories are abundant, and I'm telling you, it will take many a journalist to tell the many, many stories that still have yet to be told. For a moment, I want to deviate here again and go to the issue of social media. And Troy, you and I had this conversation at length.
We did, and social media, as you all know, is one of the largest influencers today, especially of the younger generation. Pew Research just put out a study. Let me get my numbers up here. A study that said the average person under the age of 40 spends 143 minutes a day on social media. 143 minutes a day. The number one source listed in this survey for information from those under 40, TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube were the top sources for information for young adults today. For adults over 40, the number one place to get information and news is Facebook. Facebook has now surpassed mainstream media news channels for where people get their information, and this has a profound impact on people.
Troy, what's really difficult for people to understand is the abundance of numbers. And the point is there are many influencers that are controlling the narrative. But the narrative needs to be taken back by the journalists and needs to be taken back with people who have the capacity of giving the information to the public.
That's right. Not only the journalists, but as you said, people with the capacity for giving information to the public. So there was a recent research study done by the American Psychiatric Association, and it listed this: a survey of social media influence environment and influence identification. Social media users can be influenced directly by those close relationships, such as their friends, family, and colleagues. They can be also influenced by those who follow them through shared information of goals, news, and opinions. Generally, an influencer is someone whose who entices an influencer to do the same action, make the same decisions, or change their behavior. He can also communicate information, ideas, and thoughts today, and that is really what's taking over. And if we don't, as you said, if journalists don't look at these tools to disseminate the correct information, then they're going to get the information from people who not only are disseminating different information, but have an agenda. So we did some research that behind most of the misinformation that's coming from and about Israel, about the war, is actually being paid for by leftist organizations who are paying these influencers to get out there. So how do we as Christians and communicators counter this?
First of all, I want to add Telegram. Hamas is on Telegram. How can that be that a terrorist organization is disseminating everything that they're trying to tell the world on a social media platform, and it's unauthorized, and no one's looking at it, and no one's shutting it down?
Right, and that's the other thing. Across Europe, nobody has shut it down. Telegram is the largest social media platform across Europe and in the Middle East. So nobody is. If we're not going to speak up about these issues, the NRB is an association of Christian communicators, and we're proud that right after October 7th, it was Christian communicators that immediately started to pick up the news coming out of Israel and immediately started to disseminate that across the multiple channels that they have access to. And Christian communicators, Christian news organizations, right on the heels of that, sent journalists over. They sent reporters to Israel, and they started to work with other organizations in order to get this message out. We have at the NRB have been consistently and constantly pushing our media organizations, the association, our members, to keep this issue to the forefront, because as the war goes on, this has gotten moved farther and farther in the back. But we are committed not to let this issue fade into the background. We are committed that this issue will stay in front of television, radio audience and listeners, because if we're not going to do it, if we're not passionately going to do it, who is?
Our news agency is a teaching agency. One of the things we've done over the years is we have a signed MOU with 20 universities around not just the United States, where students come to Israel and train in journalism and political science for 3 months. And now there are about 80 students that have trained over the years, and they are in leading newsrooms around the world. It is one effort, and I hope you'll engage in this effort, to help to get the word out, to have trained, bright, critically thinking, capable young people. Aside from that, we've been researching thousands of students around the world right now and understanding how they think and who can be plucked to help with this major effort that we're creating right now. And you're welcome to talk to me about that further. After this is not enough time, actually. But I also want to add, Troy, that we also just engaged a reporter here in New York because of what's going on in Colombia and what's going on in the UN. And it's critical that we make sure that the news is not just from behind the barricades, but inside the university campus. TheMediaLine.org.
And this is a big issue, because if we don't hit the younger generation, if we don't really get a hold of who's influencing them, the Jerusalem Post recently had an article about support for Israel amongst young evangelicals has plummeted by over 50% in just 3 years, posting a potential threat to the American backing for the Jewish state. I believe that. I talk in a lot of organizations and around the country, and one of my biggest groups that I'm constantly trying to educate are the under 40s, trying to educate on what Israel is. So listen to these numbers. As of late 2021, only 33.6% of young evangelicals under 30 support Israel. That's compared to 67.9% in the same year in 2018. At the same time, in 2021, 24.3% of young evangelicals said that their support for Palestinians, said they support Palestinians, compared to only 5% in 2018. We're losing the messaging war. We're winning on the battlefield, but we're losing the messaging war. So Pew also talks about, there's some research out there that said the average person, the average one of us, influences about 560 people through our networks. 560 people through our social networks, and about 500 or 30 or so people just through our personal connections and networks. To think about it, if all 80 plus million evangelicals in this country were redisseminating the information that comes out from great organizations like this, and they were getting that information in the hands of young adults today, how much impact would that have on this messaging and countering the messaging that's coming out from the left, and particularly these Palestinian support groups and these Islamic support groups? How much impact would that have if we just had enough nerve to talk about this topic and to say, hey, have you read this article? Have you looked at this article? Have you seen the truth of this? Have you seen this video? Do you understand this is what the Bible says for Christians about supporting Israel? Do you understand that there are great pastors out there, teachers like John MacArthur, who have put a great video together to say the biblical reason why Christians, evangelical Christians, should support Israel? That would change the narrative today if we all just had enough backbone and nerve to support Israel by simply posting 1 or 2 articles a day.
I can agree with you more. The problem is numbers here. And the reality is it's about getting those that can think. You have a lot of people that are just posting because it's socially acceptable. But again, I want to go back to teaching young students. It has to start younger. It's not okay to begin in college.
Right.
And I have gone into many schools to speak to young people as well to understand where their minds are.
Yeah, this whole critical theory that's been pushed upon the educational system has been pushed from colleges down into high schools and even down now into middle schools. So by the time they get into college, they walk in and they bought into this narrative that there are only 2 things that matter in the world. Who's the oppressor and who's being oppressed? They don't really get any deeper into the topic than those 2 things. So that's why you can get just the craziness of thinking that young adults would march out to the streets here in New York City holding signs up that say, gays for Palestine. For those of us who have been all across the Middle East and in radical Islamic countries, they wouldn't last 10 seconds with that sign in a street, on any street in Gaza. They would have lasted at all. But they've been brainwashed into thinking everything is about who's the oppressor and who's the oppressed. And look, as this war started, the mainstream media and the legacy media and the leftists quickly moved to label Israel as the oppressor. And all of us know that is the biggest lie being told today. There isn't any more oppressed people in the world than the Jewish people.
Israel is fighting a war on 7 fronts, but no one talks about the 8th front of what we're discussing. And I feel that it's probably at the top of the list because it superseded the war. It will continue after the war. We have to deal in the present and the future, and we have to understand what's happening on the ground. The most important thing is journalism and boots on the ground, so you can have eyes and ears on the ground to see what's happening. I was on Kibbutz Be'eri that first week. I have seen the tunnels with firsthand eyewitness years back. I understand deeply what goes on all these sides, and I have to tell you, my friends, this is not an easy war to cover, because every day you wake up to something new, and what else is going to happen? The Al-Ahli hospital story in the beginning of the war in October, where the Palestinians were claiming that Israel took out a hospital, which indeed was not the case. It was a misfired rocket by Islamist Jihad, and there wasn't 500 people killed, but 50, and that's how the war started. But it hasn't ended that way. And the point is that it continues with these stories that are constantly the new battle. And every day one has to understand what is the battle in the mainstream news and what's the battle in the social media news, and don't go out with it until you get your double sources on it, because then you're part of the mistake. We didn't talk about Al-Ahli. Right. We weren't the first to go out and telling the story as it came out.
Right, and let me just tag on something that Felice said here, because I think it's very important, so I could talk to my Christian brothers and sisters in the room for a second. You know, having been involved with this since I came to NRB in 2022, and in this whole issue of Israel, and NRB had this kind of approach to Israel in the past, which was all really kind of focused around tourism. We had a very great relationship over the years with the Israeli Minister of Tourism, and just a number of organizations that handle those kind of Holy Land experiences. And so I've seen kind of, and if I step on any toes here, I do that a lot. I'm a Nebraska farm boy. I just say it as it is. But as I've visited Israel and I've been around these groups, I see Christians, and we kind of have a 2-point reasons why we are involved with this. One, I call it the historical point, because it's the Holy Land, because it's where Jesus walked, because it has all of the holy sites, and Israel and the IDF are protecting those sites. And that's a good reason to be involved with Israel. The other one I see in a lot of places is because of our Christian eschatology, our thinking of the future and what the role Israel plays in that future. So we kind of have this past and future that drives us into our connection with Israel. But I want to challenge us all. I want to challenge us to have a present drive to be involved with and to love our Israeli friends. I'm not involved. I love both of those things, but I'm involved with Israel because of the people who are in this room today and the people who I've met in Israel and the friends that I've made and the people that I care about now. That is a message that's going to reach the younger generation. That is the message that they need to understand, that there are real families hurting. We were in Israel in May. There are families who are rockets are being fired every day from Lebanon into Israel. And these families, their children, on October 7th, could you imagine waking up and all you were going to do is send your kids out to play? And then you never saw them again. I love all that we're doing in Christianity for Israel, but let's do it because we love our Israeli friends so deeply that we will risk our own reputations. We will risk being ostracized by other people. We will put our faith to action because we love people, and that's what we're called to do.
We can.
We have about 3 or 4 minutes, and that's it. Are there any questions? I think one thing is, most important thing is to challenge all of us to be activated on social media, to be able to put out posts ourselves that are correct. Rory, you had a question. He wanted to know if they had contact with the Office of Hasbara, which is the public relations voice for Israel.
Go ahead.
Well, Troy, quite honestly, this is a very complex question because that is really a good office in terms of advocacy organizations, but it's not the right address necessarily for a news entity. A news entity is not a propaganda tool. And people have to understand that if the news entity can just give the facts and have journalism play out correctly, that's most of the battle. Half the time it's the omission.
Yeah, so on the journalistic side, I agree with that. We who do a lot of advocacy do have contact and work with the office on issues to help get things to the forefront.
Are there any other questions anybody would like to ask? Take advantage of it. Probably think of them after we leave.
I do want to leave everyone with this. And on our website, themedialine.org, we have a section called Reading the News. It has an animated pen, and it's in 10 languages, and it teaches you about journalism. What is a news story? What is an analysis? What is an opinion piece? Most people think news is opinion half the time, but it shouldn't be. And I think it's important that everybody take a few minutes to go through that video. It's about 13 minutes. It's going to be something that will change your minds in terms of how you look at news.
So one of the things that we started, that we changed, I started at the NRB, was rather than doing just the normal Holy Land experience, we started what we called a solidarity and fact-finding tour. So this is to bring people over, leaders in the Christian community, to connect with people in the Israeli government, to connect people in the NGOs that are within Israel, and to connect with people in the religious community as well, the Orthodox Jewish community and the different religious communities. So we did our first one this May. We're going to do one again in May, just right leading up to the Jerusalem prayer breakfast in Jerusalem next year. So we have some information about that in the back room. You can see me or my friends from Connexit Journeys back there. Wave your hand there, Marnix, he's got some. And we'd love to see you come over. And this, again, this is about building relationships with people that we love and we can pray for every day. Thank you.
We're looking to empower those who can do social media.
Anyone that's willing to come up to us and talk to us about getting social media out in a larger capacity, we're all ears. We're in the middle of a big project ourselves related to this. This is the future, and we need to tackle it. Israel is fighting for an existential war for its life, and this is the time, folks. And just let truth hold. Thank you.
We're all influencers.